My name is Evelyn Marlowe, and at 68 I have outlived a great many things. Husbands, markets, fashions, and the particular kind of loneliness that accumulates in large houses. Once, long before my hair silvered, I kept the ledgers for my late husband Richard's modest consultancy, balancing invoices at a kitchen table with a wobbly leg. Years passed. The business swelled into something with executive floors and glass that refused fingerprints. When Richard died, the brand survived. My son's name, Adrian, rose on facades like a weather report you couldn't escape. The afternoon they celebrated my birthday, the sea lay smooth as lacquer. A crew of 3 moved about a chartered yacht as if they had rehearsed our joy. Lydia, my daughter-in-law, guided me to a chaise with a tenderness that felt shop-bought, not counterfeit, just returnable. Music, champagne, a curated breeze, someone had placed beauty where conversation should have been. I told myself not to look for Richard in the horizon's line. Adrian came to the rail smiling a fraction too precisely. He leaned close, so close that his cologne eclipsed the salt air. "Mother," he murmured, "send your regards to the deep." At first the words refused meaning. Then his palm, a steady managerial palm, found my shoulder. The deck tilted without moving. The sky folded. I fell backward, arms trying and failing to rewrite balance, and the ocean accepted me the way a ledger accepts a final zero. Water does not greet, it claims. It went into my ears, under my tongue, around the corners of thought, and everywhere it went, it spoke one language heavy. The yacht receded to a white line. Above the sun had the indifference of a camera flash. I kicked once, twice, linen loosed from my body like seaweed, and for a breath I surfaced. I saw Adrian's outline and Lydia's formal quiet beside him, both small against the sky, neither in motion. Their stillness was a sentence. The cold carved me into separate pieces. Fear memory muscle. Memory won first. Not the empire, not any gala where I'd worn polite pearls and been thanked for making everything possible as if I were a Grant and not a woman. No. A different water returned, a lake in New Hampshire, a rented dock, a boy with shaky knees in a bathing suit with frogs on it. "It's hi, Mama," little Adrian said once, toes curling at the board's edge. I treaded water, arms open. "Then I'll be closer when you jump," I promised. He leapt. I caught him. Easy arithmetic, faith plus arms equals safety. Here, in salt and shock, the equation reversed. He pushed. I sank. Something cross-hatched the water near me. A life ring, disobedient to tides, knocked my shoulder and stayed. I did not reach for it as a drowning woman. I reached the way you pull a file from a shelf after years of mislabeling. My hands learned the rope. Somehow there was a hull, not the one that left me, but a working boat with paint baked to chalk. A voice, dry kindling, not alarm, cut through the noise. "You with me?" it asked, not loudly. I woke to a ceiling that could remember storms. Stain shadows bloomed where the beams met plaster. The air smelled of salt and something gingered. The kettle on the stove clicked as if considering a thought. A man sat by the window with the posture of someone who had taught his back to be practical. His hands were veined and sun-scored. They wrapped a mug with the competence of a habit. "You take sugar," he said, not asking. "It's on the table." Speech and I had not caught up with one another, so I nodded. He poured. The cup and saucer disagreed about being a set, but stood together anyway. He slid the tea toward me and made no more offers than necessary. When you have been costumed by expensive care for long enough, the absence of performance is its own balm. "My name's Jonas Pike," he said eventually. Eyes on the window's weather. "Been here on this stretch near Sable Sound longer than I've had patience for calendars. Found you hanging on the ring. Gulls made more fuss than you did." "Eve," I said, because my surname felt like paperwork. The voice that came out belonged to someone who climbed stairs slowly with a gift in both hands. He nodded as if checking a box found a live named. "Bathrooms down the hall, towels on the radiator. Warm up before you go deciding things." He left me to the room, and the clock on the wall resumed its wooden heartbeat. I wrapped a blanket around the parts of me still negotiating with the cold, and studied the room the way you study a stranger's grocery cart, evidence of a life. A coat on a peg, boots that had done their miles, a chipped plate with the constellation of a long-ago apple. In houses with programmable lights, you become a silhouette that commands applause. Here I was a person again. My fingers curled around the mug. Steam blurred the line between outside and in. Morning arrived out of habit. Jonas had left the television on the dry sink as if it were a guest with somewhere to be. The news anchor wore the calm of people who lend language to catastrophes that aren't theirs. "Local benefactor Evelyn Marlowe is presumed lost at sea," she said. And my face, older than I feel, younger than I feared, flashed above a ribbon of letters. The photo they'd chosen was event-safe navy dress, controlled hair, the smile the world expects when it believes you are fortunate. The station cut to a press conference. Adrian stood at the microphones crafted by a committee. Wind had arranged his hair into something sincere. My mother and I had a complicated relationship he began because public grief must apologize for nuance. She gave more than anyone knew. He lowered his head on cue. Lydia beside him produced a silk handkerchief and dabbed at the idea of tears. They wrapped me in generic piano and B-roll hospital openings, ribbon cuttings. A laugh caught mid-applause. No numbers, only optics. No ledgers, only legend. I reduced the volume until their voices became moving lips and background strings. In the quiet that followed, a thought as sharp as a seam ripper. They had not tried to end me today. They had been practicing for years. Let us handle that? Mother signed with a smile. Every time a room looked past me to the altar of the brand. You don't push a woman into the sea without first pushing her out of the frame. Breathing made a new sound in my body. Not a sob, not quite. A hinge that had not opened in a long time decided it was a door after all. Jonas returned with toast and did not look at the screen. Eat, he said. A man who understood that fuel is the first answer and sometimes the only one that will be accepted. I obeyed. Butter admitted its simplicity. He sat. The kettle refilled. We let the clock patrol the silence. Who should I call, he asked later, which sounded like, who deserves notice? No one, I said, and the word was not born of bravado, but of recognition. In the calculus of survival, witness is not the same as rescue. He studied my face the way water studies a shoreline, checking for where the shape had changed. If you need anything, I keep to mornings and come back at dusk. Door sticks in the afternoon. Thank you, I said, and the syllables landed with the weight of a vow. When he left, I turned the television off. The screen went black and showed me a version of my face that belonged to no one's narrative. I waited for fear to take back the room. Instead, something leaner arrived, clarity stripped for work. There is a peculiar freedom in being declared gone. The phone will not ring for donations or favors. Cars will not pause to see what you are wearing. Even sympathy knows not where to send itself. What you have left is quieter the ability to choose the next verb without asking permission. The world thinks you have finished. You have not. You have been given an edit. I stood slowly. The blanket fell. My hands discovered steadiness as if the bones had saved a pocket of it for me. The cottage door did indeed catch on its stubborn hinge, and the afternoon let itself in with a breath of brine. Outside, the sound placed its soft hands on the rocks and withdrew them over and over the way time practices. I walked to the waterline. The tide had errands, the gulls filed brief reports. Somewhere beyond the horizon was a white boat and a son who believed absence could be notarized. Somewhere behind me was a room that smelled of ginger and ordinary mercy. I did not plan revenge there, not with waves listening. I planned return not to them, but to myself. It would require an education in patience and the kind of truth that doesn't shout. It would require allowing Adrian and Lydia to believe the story they had written for a little while longer. It would require me to step out of the glare and into the only theater where I could still direct the lights, the quiet. Back inside, I found a stub of pencil near the telephone and a torn corner from a grocery list that read, eggs, rope oil, mending. On the blank side, I wrote my name the way you write a destination on the back of your hand when you're afraid you'll be turned around, Evelyn. Not the signature from legal documents, not the polite calligraphy from donor plaques, just the name the mirror knows. I tucked the scrap into my sleeve like a charm. Then I poured the last of the tea, pressed my palms around the heat, and let the kettle's small voice keep time while I decided the first step of a life that had been pronounced finished. The step would not be loud. It would not be photographed. It would be correct. Evening gathered. The door stuck, then relented. I drew the bolt, felt the cottage hold me, and understood that the opposite of disappearance is not spectacle. It is decision. Let them hold their vigil. Let them rehearse their remarks. Let the obituary circulate like a brochure. I will be where they are not looking alive in the margin, learning the architecture of a quieter kind of power. And when the time comes to speak, I will not raise my voice. I will simply be present. The day after the news declared me gone, the world behaved as if it had been waiting for permission. Condolences bloomed in inboxes I no longer opened. An arts foundation posted a black-bordered square. The city's business journal ran a headline that made my life sound like a fiscal quarter. Jonas set a plate of toast between us and did not mention any of it. He pruned the silence the way a gardener thins a hedge just enough to let the light in. I needed a name that wasn't grief. I flipped through the Rolodex of my past and found Nora Vale. Nora had been the kind of state investigator who made lobbyists sweat. Years ago, when Richard was alive and the office still fit inside 2 suites, she'd volunteered as counsel for our scholarship fund pro bono and impatient with ceremony. We hadn't spoken in a decade. I called the number I had. A different voice answered and gave me another. When I finally reached her, the line hummed with traffic and a dog barking distantly. Eve Marlowe, she said, not asking measuring. You're supposed to be a eulogy. I'm a draft that didn't pass legal, I replied. A beat, then a laugh that sounded like relief that someone somewhere had told the truth. Come by, she said. The red door on Kendrick Street. Don't tell anyone you're breathing yet. Her office had once been a tailor's shop, long table, good light, honest dust. On the wall hung a corkboard stitched with pushpins and string, the conspiracy theorist's cliché redeemed by competence. She poured coffee I didn't need and handed me a legal pad already titled, What They Changed. Give me the outline, she said, no embroidery. I gave her the yacht, the stillness on the deck, the anchorman, the way Lydia managed her tears with a silk handkerchief like PR collateral. When I finished, she clicked a pen twice, a small metronome for resolve. First, we confirm whether you've been erased on paper, she said. Murder without the mess is a paperwork sport. She opened a laptop that had stickers on it like badges. Sunshine faded, edges lifting. While I remembered passwords I never gave anyone. She made a list: recorder of deeds, trust registry, medical proxy filings, bank, beneficiary designations. The county's public portal, unlovely but efficient, showed a deed recorded 6 weeks prior, title transferred from Evelyn R. Marlowe to Marlowe Family Holdings, LLC. The signature under my printed name looked like mine in the way a mannequin looks like a woman outlined correct life absent. The notary stamp belonged to a clerk who'd retired 2 years ago. Sloppy Nora said the way you'd comment on a hemline. They used a still stamp, either bought or borrowed. She cross-checked with the state licensing page. Retired 18 months, she read, which means any notarization under that seal is void on contact. She moved to probate. The trust filings showed a consolidation of Marlowe education funds into something named Amaranth Foundation Executive Director Lydia Marlowe. A durable power of attorney had been scanned with my name on it, and a doctor's letter attached, mild cognitive decline affecting executive function. Do you even misplace your keys, Nora asked. I misplace people, I said, not keys. She didn't smile. Harold Tiggs, MD, she read. Marin County. Out of network, which is convenient for people who don't want insurance asking questions. Her fingers drummed. Template language. I've seen it. He'll fold the minute someone with a badge asks for his intake notes. She kept pulling thread. A charitable remainder trust rewritten. A board amendment rammed through during a meeting I'd never been invited to. Everywhere Lydia's name. Everywhere Adrian's authorizing signature, the confident slope of a man who'd learned long ago that forms were suggestions. We needed samples of Lydia's hand beyond her stylized signature. Her lists, I said. She writes them in caps and gives them to assistants like choreography. There'll be a notebook. She wouldn't trust a cloud to remember what she's already decided. Nora made a face I recognized from the mirror when a plan arrived intact. We'll need you to go in. Break in, I asked. Re-enter, she said. Words matter. We chose a night that didn't belong to anyone but cats, an underpaid doorman Tuesday. Jonas offered to drive me, no questions attached. I told him I needed to know I could get there under my own legs. He nodded like a man who'd learned the difference between help and takeover. The Magnolia Street house had been repainted in the kind of white that flattered real estate photographs. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through a weather the color of pewter. The hedges I'd planted years ago with a landscaper who loved Latin names had been coerced into spheres. The bell had been replaced with a panel that glowed impersonal blue. I didn't touch the front. I took the garden path, the one Richard had laid flagstone into the summer. Adrian turned 12 the summer we pretended camping could be done under string lights. Lydia had added motion sensors to the west patio. In doing so, she'd ignored the narrow ground-level window that opened into the storage room. A child could wriggle through. I'm no longer a child, but I remember how not to be noticed. The window's latch had kept faith with me. It lifted with the faintest groan, the sound of houses keeping secrets. I slid down onto a plastic bin labeled Winter Throws and stayed still until the air decided I belonged. Upstairs, the house slept like money, climate-controlled, empty of creek, perfumed with something that wanted to be citrus. Lydia and Adrian's bedroom was 2 floors above. Their breathing would be the ghost I didn't have to see. I moved through the first floor by memory more than sight. The study had been my office. Now it was an arrangement of minimal furniture that made a room look like the idea of a room. Drawers held appliance manuals, tax receipts, carefully blank paper. I found what I needed in the bottom of a drawer, mislabeled MISC, a beige folder with a faint coffee ring that had dried into the shape of a moon. Inside, a document titled Operation Cobalt. Lydia was many things, but shy about nomenclature wasn't one of them. The first page had a mission line: transition all assets into long horizon control under Marlowe line. Eliminate risk vectors caused by emotionally compromised decision makers. My eye snagged on the phrase emotionally compromised the way a sweater catches on a nail. The next page was a timetable month 1 float, the suggestion of stepping back from board. Month 2, raise concern with trusted physician. Month 3, initiate durable POA. Citing stress-induced decision fatigue. Month 4, incident. No elaboration. When you intend harm, euphemism does the heavy lifting. Spreadsheets followed, color-coded with transfer statuses. At the back, a signature page, notarized Adrian's hand fashioned into a cent. I photocopied nothing. I put the folder into the tote I'd brought and closed the drawer. Then an impulse that felt less like vengeance than like memory I took from my bag, a square of cloth I hadn't touched in 25 years. It was a corner I'd saved from Adrian's first blanket, trimmed with a navy ribbon I'd stitched myself at a kitchen table, crowded with invoices and bottle warmers. His name was cross-stitched in crooked beginner letters, Adrian. If you spend your life tidying evidence of love, you learn that sometimes the mess must be made visible. I laid the square on the mantel where our wedding photo used to stand. Lydia had replaced that image with a polished sculpture that resembled 2 rings meeting a chord. I moved the sculpture left an inch asyn to the catalog, so the cloth had room to be seen. A small red dot blinked in the corner of the ceiling. Good. Let the camera do what witnesses had refused to. As I eased back toward the storage room, a board sighed under my weight with a disloyalty I forgave instantly. Footsteps above. Lydia's no. Adrian's heavier cadence. A faucet ran. A door. My heart beat a rhythm I recognized from the times I'd waited outside operating rooms. Waiting uses the same drums as fear. It just counts differently. Silence returned with the politeness of a doorman. I slipped through the window into the night and closed it the way you close a book you're not done with. The air on Magnolia tasted like rain held back. Nora's office smelled like someone else's coffee when I arrived. She wore readers on the end of her nose and a sweater that had outlasted seasons. I set Operation Cobalt on the table between us. She didn't reach for it immediately. She arrived at it the way one approaches a patient presence first, then touch. She turned pages without noise. When she found the timetable, she made a sound in her throat like a hinge catching. They wrote themselves a playbook, she said. Courts hate playbooks. We scanned the spreadsheets and she circled with a pencil the bank account changes that coincided with the doctor's letter. I'll pull his malpractice carrier, she said. Doctors who sell diagnosis always make the same bookkeeping mistakes, cash no ICD codes, invoices with adjectives. She pulled a blank chain of custody form from a drawer. We log how this arrived. If we use any of it, we can show it wasn't manufactured after the fact. And the cloth, evidence of a fact not in dispute, I said. That there was once a child in this house who belonged to me before he belonged to a board. She wrote cloth square navy trim on a line and looked at me over the rims of her glasses. You're making them remember. I'm making me remember, I said. They can't weaponize what they don't recognize. Nora's plan cared for 2 fronts, one legal, one human. On the legal front, she drafted a packet for the Marlowe Trust Council board members who had known Richard before success, had a marketing department. It would include the forged notary, the template diagnosis, the timetable, and a request under Article 17B to freeze discretionary distributions pending a review. On the human front, she recommended a message to Adrian that didn't threaten, didn't accuse, just remove the hiding place. You send it from an account he'll accept as you, she said. If he doubts, he'll spiral. If he spirals, he calls Lydia. If she senses a crack, she overcorrects. That's when boards learn the truth. They hear the overcorrection before they see the documents. I still had an old alumni board address that IT had never killed because its auto-replies handled donor dinners without complaint. The password was a poem I'd loved in college, the kind of secret that keeps better than a birthday. I logged in from Nora's machine and typed a subject line that was not dramatic, not daring. Subject still breathing. The body asked for no reply. I remember the rail, the quiet witness, and the hand that finished what the planning began. I'm not coming to the police, not yet. Make a list of what you changed. You'll need it soon. Nora read over my shoulder, not editing, calibrating. Good, she said. No theater. Theater is for the press. Truth is for the board. Won't this give them time to bury the rest, I asked. They already buried it, she said. We're giving them time to act like guilty people, which is better evidence than paperwork. I hovered over send. The cursor pulsed the way a heartbeat looks when you listen to it on a monitor, indifferent to your feelings, faithful to its job. I pressed the key. Somewhere miles from Kendrick Street, a computer pinged. Somewhere else, a stomach fell the length of a lobby. Nora handed me a thin leather folder with tabbed sections. We don't fight this with appetite. We fight it with sequence, she said. Tonight, you go back to Sable Sound. Sleep. Tomorrow, I take Cobalt to 2 people on the council who remember you as a person and not a paragraph. They'll make noise. Noise will make caution. Caution will freeze funds. After that, we'll see who calls whom. On my way out, I saw the tailor's mirror, the kind with 3 panels that allows you to see yourself from angles you didn't consent to. In the side glass, my profile looked like my mother's. In the front, like my own. The woman who left the office was not a victim and not yet a victor. She was a decision waiting for its moment. The road back to Sable ran along the lip of the water. Boats shouldered the dark like patient animals. At the cottage, Jonas had left his porch light on and a note with his impossible square handwriting, soup on the stove. Eat, or I'll be offended. J. The soup tasted like time and economy. I ate standing at the sink, listening for a phone that I no longer carried. Sleep didn't arrive so much as agree to share the bed. When it released me in the gray hour, I went to the small table by the window where the tea things kept their own quiet company. I wrote on a clean page of Nora's legal pad, steps, not wishes. Recorder's office file complaint, fraudulent notarization. Physician Nora to request intake notes billing. Bank flag changes tied to POA, request board review under 17B. Trust contact Graham Heller, Richard's classmate. Confirm meeting schedule. Adrian wait. The sky lifted by increments. At 9:07, Nora texted packet delivered to Heller and Bellamy. Call scheduled. At 9:30, another template doc confirmed on 2 other cases. Doctor will fold. At 10:05, board counsel asking for originals. We have chain. Each line shortened the future by a notch. I took the cloth scrap out of my bag and laid it on the table. The navy ribbon had faded to a gentler blue. The letters of my son's name were not pretty. They were earnest. I wanted briefly and with great treason to forgive him in advance, to write a note that said, be better, and slip it into the pocket of a jacket he might reach into by accident. Forgiveness is a hospitality I no longer offer to housebreak wolves. By noon, the weather had become a soft, persistent rain, the kind that makes even the brave prefer offices. I set the kettle spooned leaves and let the clock work. Somewhere in a tower with a view of the bay, a man read an email and believed in ghosts. Somewhere in a townhouse with perfect pillows, a woman rehearsed what certainty sounds like when certainty has gone. At 2, Jonas knocked once and opened the door the way friends do, in a way that says both I can go and I will stay. Storm later, he said, you picked the right day to be alive indoors. Do you ever get tired of the water, I asked. I get tired of men who think they own it, he said, amused more than bitter. The kettle clicked off. The rain moved from soft to paragraph. I thought of Lydia's sculpture, the intersecting rings, the way it didn't quite know whether it was one object or 2. I thought of the camera's red blink. I thought of Operation Cobalt printed on corporate letterhead, because men like Adrian believe that paper makes fiction behave. At 3:20, my old alumni address beeped. Delivery failed auto-reply from a board member whose mailbox was full. At 3:21, another ping from NOR Council escalated. Hearing soon. Keep off the grid. Soon is a treacherous word. It has the exact elasticity of hope. I folded the cloth and slid it back into my bag. Jonas fetched his slicker. The rain practiced being weather. That evening, the wind rose on schedule and combed the sound into white. I stood on the porch and let it take heat from my cheeks. Somewhere downtown, Adrian would be staring at a screen he couldn't close, his reflection a poor witness. Somewhere across a polished table, Lydia would be calibrating alibis with the precision she once applied to seating charts. I no longer had to imagine their conversations. The play had already been written and staged. All that remained was the second act's curtain. I went inside, drew the bolt, and set my phone on the table face down. The cottage held steady around me, a small good ship. Outside, the storm rehearsed its lines. Inside, I rehearsed mine, not rage, not plea presence. When the house settled and the kettle sighed, one last time, I opened Nora's folder and read Article 17B again, each clause, each comma. It was the door I intended to walk through without raising my voice. The night took the rest of the light and left me with a room, a table, and a plan that loved sequence more than spectacle. Tomorrow would bring phone calls and statements, shuffles of feet in hallways that now knew my name had not vacated its chair. For now, there was only the sound of rain, the taste of tea, and the knowledge that I had already stepped back into the frame the moment I refused to vanish as written. By morning, the rain had washed the windows clear enough to see the sound, thinking about whitecaps. I made tea and waited for the day to declare its temperature. Nora texted at 8:11. Heller looped Bellamy. Packet accepted. Council reviewing 17BA, expect movement. At 9:02, bank compliance flagged POA, questions en route to Amaranth. At 9:17, she added only a single word today. Today arrived first for Adrian. I didn't witness the call, but later when Nora replayed the redacted board transcript for me, I could hear the shape of him inside, the silence between the sentences. A woman from Trust Council measured courteous, unarguable, read the motion. Effective immediately, all discretionary distributions, draws, and executive privileges associated with the Marlowe Legacy Trust are suspended pending independent review under Article 17 BAPA. She listed the grounds as if announcing whether irregular notarization template diagnosis, consolidation of education funds into a vehicle directed by Lydia, conflict failures, and a timetable entitled Operation Cobalt that had the misfortune of being both thorough and discovered. Adrian said the same word 3 different ways. Mistake. First as bluster, then as plea, lastly as a query aimed at the floor. Counsel thanked him for his time and told him the board would be in touch. By the time I folded the dish towel across the oven handle, the world at large had not yet caught the scent, but the people who matter to outcomes had. Bellamy texted Nora, Freeze went through. Get your client somewhere quiet. I was already there. Soup, Jonas asked, leaning in the doorway with the weather at his back as if soup were a form of shelter. Later, I said. The kettle clicked its small approval. Nora arrived with the look of someone who has just navigated a building full of mirrors and kept her outline. She laid a thin envelope on the table, heavy with letterhead. Acknowledgement from counsel, she said. And a schedule. Special session 48 hours. You don't have to attend. You may want to appear. Appear without arriving, I said. Exactly. Let them choose the verb. What's our step before they start rewriting adjectives, I asked. She tapped the envelope. We keep sequence legal, financial, human. Legal is moving. Financial is paused. Human is where they leak. Your cloth on the mantel gave them something to argue with each other about at 2 a.m. Use it. How? Presence, she said, not performance. I looked at the key I still kept on a string in my bag, the brass one Richard had pressed into my palm decades ago with a smile that meant door not permission. Then we staged one conversation, I said, in the only room that ever told the truth to our faces. Dusk is an honest light. It forgives less and shows more. I chose it. Magnolia Street recognized my hands the way good houses do. The lock turned with the slight complaint of something out of practice, but willing. Inside the white, Lydia Favored had taken on the color of evening less gallery, more humbling. I walked past the parlor piano that never made a sound, and into the room Richard had once called the den, until a designer renamed it the salon as if carpet remembers rebranding. Richard's chair still held his shape because leather never lies. I sat and let the room arrange itself around me. The clock on the mantel, a new spare thing, with no numerals, ticked like an apology to the old one that had known our dinners. I didn't wait long. The front door announced Lydia first. Even her hurry had posture. She turned the corner with a phone to her ear and a sentence loaded for release. It didn't launch. The phone slid from her hand to a velvet bench. You, she said, and the word clattered on the marble. Adrian followed with the look that wanted to be a strategy. He stopped, and strategies are not known for stopping themselves. Mother, he said, as if the syllables could reset the room. I prefer Evelyn, I replied. It belongs to me. He swallowed. Lydia found her balance on a picture-perfect breath. We were told, she began. I know what you were told, I said. You made sure of it. No one sat. I let their standing be part of the lesson. I placed Operation Cobalt on the coffee table. I had replaced Nora's binder clip with a ribbon from the kitchen drawer navy, the kind meant for napkins at holidays. Lydia's eyes did an inventory without moving. Adrian did not look down. He was not ready to see the handwriting of his future. You've been in my office, Lydia said, managing to spin it like a theft rather than a retrieval. I've been home, I said. Words matter. She smiled the way a skater does on thin ice, bright, intent on keeping the surface intact. Evelyn, whatever this is, counsel will sort it. We acted within the advice of professionals. Professionals with retired stamps and templated diagnoses, I said gently. You hired tacticians to erase a person. They were good at verbs, less good at dates. Adrian's face changed. He had always taken pride in understanding the calendar. Deals are old men with watches. What dates, he asked, unable to let the question go unsaid. I slid the notarization page across the table. This seal belongs to someone who left her desk 18 months before you asked her to bless my consent. Your doctor's letter uses language that recurs in other cases where guardianship paperwork moved money faster than truth. Your transfer of scholarship funds into Amaranth coincided with your physician's concern that I could no longer correctly sign my name, though a week later you emailed me to ask for edits to a donor letter with 5 complex clauses. He closed his eyes. Lydia didn't. You can't prove intent, she said, aiming herself at the word like a fencer. I pointed once small at the mission line on Cobalt. Eliminate risk vectors caused by emotionally compromised decision-makers. Intent is a matter of record, I said. Silence is a tool. I used it. Somewhere a car idled. Somewhere a neighbor chose when to draw a curtain. Inside, the unsaid had a physical shape. You want money, Adrian said finally, and the word landed as cheap as a penny dropped in a crystal bowl. I want my name back, I said. The money interests you because you believe it is how names are spelled. He flinched. Lydia pivoted. Even if we accept your version, she said, each word separate so she could examine it for weakness. What's your play court press? You'll look cruel. Grief makes people generous to survivors. I'm not interested in cruelty, I said. It's inefficient. I lifted the envelope Nora had left on my table and slid out the board's notice. This, however, is extremely efficient. By the time the papers catch up to your press releases, the trust will have completed its review. Distributions will have remained frozen, and the people who knew Richard before his name required sponsorship will have voted on whether you belong anywhere near his legacy. Adrian took the letter with hands he tried to steady and failed. He read the first paragraph and stopped at the third. He sat without permission, which is the same as falling. I won't file a criminal complaint, I said. The room shifted as a room's do when a sentence unlocks the window. Lydia exhaled the breath she'd been holding hostage. Not because you don't deserve to answer questions under oath, I continued, and watched the exhale jam in her throat, but because the law does not enforce the only truth that matters here. What truth is that? Adrian asked, and to his credit, his voice had no theater left in it. That you killed Trust, I said, and you can't be jailed for that. You can only be named. He stared at the navy ribbon. For a moment, he was the boy on a diving board, knees unsure, pretending not to be afraid. He set the letter down like it might break. What do you want me to do? He asked. Not as a negotiation, but as a student who finally understood the course had never been about the grade. Make a list, I said. Not for me, for the board. Every change you signed, every time you let Lydia steer while you pretended you were the wheel. And then this is important, stop speaking to people who tell you you're right. Lydia found a laugh. It sounded like cutlery in a disposal. She thinks this is a rehabilitation, she said to the room at large. No, I said, this is a reckoning. Rehabilitation is optional. I reached into my bag and drew out an envelope of my own, not as thick as the board's old paper, Richard's handwriting on the front for Evelyn. Inside a letter dated 6 weeks before he died. I didn't hand it to Adrian. I read, "If I go first, protect the house of your name. If our son ever mistakes legacy for ownership, don't shield him from the weather. He must learn what carries a roof is not a deed, but a vow." I folded the letter. He loved you, I said, because that was also true. He would have asked better of you. Adrian bowed his head. Lydia, who does not bow, moved toward the door with the controlled urgency of someone who has discovered a leak behind a wall and believes a contractor and a non-disclosure can fix it. She paused in the threshold, turned back. "We can still settle," she said, putting sugar in a sentence made of bone. "We are settling," I said, "just not for less." I stood. Richard's chair released me with a sound like old leather remembering better weather. "We're not done," Lydia said. We are," I said. "You'll have your hearing invitation by morning. Wear whatever makes you feel credible." I let the word take its time. Adrian rose because I had. "Mother," he began and corrected himself. "Evelyn." "Bring a pen," I said. "Not to sign, to cross out." I left the way I came and the door closed without drama. Outside dusk had deepened to something the streetlights mistook for romance. I walked to the car and did not check the windows to see if anyone watched. Either they were or they weren't, and neither would change the temperature of the evening. The council's special session met in a room that remembered cigars even if it no longer allowed them. I did not attend. Nora did, with Bellamy on one side like an old oak, and Heller on the other like a careful mirror. Council moved through the pages with the pleasure of a clean-case retired notary, templated diagnosis bank transfers, in rhythm with medical concern the playbook itself, handwritten notes margining cobalt with Lydia's tidy capitals, PR narrative bereavement cycle. Board optics. Stability. Adrian brief him after. The men and women at the table winced at that last line because everyone in power knows the temptation to parent optics, and none of them wished to be caught on paper doing so. Nora didn't ask them for a verdict. She asked them for process freeze maintained, independent physician assessment if required, appointment of a temporary custodian not named in any of Lydia's or Adrian's documents, and a stipulation that I be restored to every file that had named me incompetent without my consent. Bellamy spoke last. "Richard was my friend before he had a brand," he said for the minutes. "He told me once the difference between succession and theft is who writes the first draft. Today we're taking the draft back." The motion carried. At noon, a letter left the building with my name at the top, not as a memorial, but as a principal. At 12:20, my old alumni inbox pinged "Delivery complete to Adrian and Lydia," subject line "Notice of continued freeze and review." At 12:34, Jonas and I ate soup that asked nothing of us but a spoon. He watched the water while I watched the clock. "You don't need to attend," he said, meaning the hearing, meaning the argument, meaning the life they insisted on living in public. "I will attend what requires my face," I said. "This part only needs my back." "What comes after?" he asked. "After they finish pretending they don't understand what happened," I said. "We see whether Adrian understands what is left to carry." He scraped the last of his bowl and set the spoon down the way men who have spent their lives near weather do, lightly ready for movement. My phone face down obedient buzzed like a trapped fly and lay still. I didn't turn it over. I knew the shape of that message already: a lawyer's voice calling itself a courtesy, a publicist's draft calling itself compassion, a son's half-sentence calling itself apology without carrying its own ink. Nora texted different tone. We have it. 17B affirmed. Temporary custodian appointed Caldwell. You're reinstated on paper. Counsel will advise next steps. Then, a second ping. One more thing. Charter company had deck cam. Partial audio clipped but clear enough. Sending file. I opened the link and heard Windwater, a clink of glass. The shape of a sentence without all its syllables, and then Adrian's voice as if spoken into a coat. Mother, send your... the deep. Not complete, not courtroom clean, but the sea has a way of finishing other people's sentences. Useful, Jonas asked. Leaning in. Not in law, I said, in memory. I printed the notice, slid it into the navy folder with cobalt, and placed both in a canvas tote that once carried beach towels and now carried a life. The cloth scrap with Adrian's name went into my pocket. I did not put the deck audio on a device I intended to press like a trigger. I didn't need to. I had learned the power of letting others hear themselves when the room was quiet enough. At 4:15, I drove back to Magnolia Street, not to argue, to end a paragraph. The door opened on the second knock. This time Adrian answered alone. He had not shaved, or he had, and it hadn't mattered. He stepped back to let me in and closed the door with the gentleness of someone who understands, at last, that slamming does not make a point, stronger, only shorter. In the living room, I put the notice on the table and stood. He didn't ask me to sit. Lydia's absence had the weight of strategy, not accident. It's done, I said. The freeze holds. An independent custodian will mind what you treated like a machine. You will receive instructions, you will follow them. And when they ask you what you changed, you will tell them. He nodded once, no theater. Are you going to the police, he asked. No, I said. This isn't mercy, it's math. The only sentence that matters here cannot be served. What sentence is that? He asked, voice quiet and for the first time in years uncoached. That you stopped being a Marlowe the day you mistook my silence for permission, I said. Names are not plaques, they're promises. His eyes wet, then did not spill. He looked at the mantel. The square of cloth lay where I had left it, softer in the evening than the sculpture beside it. I remember that ribbon, he said. Then remember it properly, I replied. It was stitched at a table that held invoices in your bottle. Both were paid. He took a step towards me. What do I do now? He did not mean the board or the law or even Lydia. He meant the whole. Work, I said. Not the kind you're good at, the kind you've avoided. It begins with a call to counsel, then a call to the scholarship office to restore what you took from children to purchase your certainty. And then if you have any courage left, a call to yourself. Ask who taught you to believe that love was a resource you could consolidate. The clock, modern numeral free, ticked its blank ticks. He nodded again, and I saw Richard for a fraction of a second, the version of him that could apologize without collapsing into charm. I am not coming back here, I said, making the architecture of the sentence clear. Not to live, not to haunt. This house belongs to a story I finished writing when you chose your verb. He closed his eyes. He began. Save it, I said, not unkind. When you find a sentence that holds, you'll know where to send it. I took the cloth from the mantel and refolded it, not as a threat, not as a prize, only as a correction. I left the ribbon. At the door, I turned once because some rituals survive even reclamation. There is a hearing, I said. You will go. You will listen. You will not speak until asked. He nodded. Will you be there? I will be present, I said. That's different. The hearing lived in a room that once believed in mahogany. Brass numbers on the door carpet that swallowed footsteps, a view of water that pretended to be neutral. I took a seat in the last row, a place designed for witnesses who prefer oxygen. Nora sat 2 chairs over with a folder that could have doubled as a level, its edges so straight the room had to adjust. Caldwell, the temporary custodian, called the session to order. Counsel summarized the record without ceremony, a retired notary's seal, a templated letter diagnosing decline, transfers aligned to that letter, and the document no one in the room could unsee Operation Cobalt, with Lydia's tidy annotations in the margins like a tour guide for malfeasance. Adrian spoke only when asked. I signed what I was told was necessary, he said, voice low. No stagecraft left. Counsel asked who told him. His eyes did not find Lydia, which was its own answer. Lydia made her attempt. We managed a complex transition under best practice advice. The phrase thudded. Bellamy leaned toward his mic as if toward a chessboard. Best practice for whom he asked, and no one volunteered to be the subject. They voted. The freeze remained. Lydia was barred from any role touching the trust. Adrian was removed from discretionary authority and required to submit a complete log of changes with counsel empowered to reverse them where appropriate. My legal standing erased by paperwork was restored in print that did not need italics. Caldwell's custodianship continued until a permanent structure could be agreed without euphemism. No applause, no gavels, just the soft shuffle of people reacquainting themselves with consequences. Outside the corridor, remembered old cigars. Adrian waited by the elevator, a man who suddenly understood why buildings have stairwells. Evelyn, he said. The name fit him better than Mother ever had in the months he'd practiced erasing me. I'll do the ledger, he added, meaning the list. All of it. Good, I said. Begin with the scholarship funds. They'll be restored, he said, then stopped as if the next sentence required parts he had not used in years. And... He swallowed. I'm sorry, I thought your silence was consent. Silence is not a signature, I said, but it will always be easier to forge. He nodded, not in agreement, but recognition. Lydia swept past a moment later, phone-to-ear expression ironed. She glanced at me as Atweather acknowledged, not comprehended, and turned the corner toward whatever script remained. Nora joined me at the stair. Dr. Tiggs folded, she said. License under review, notary investigation reopened. Also, Caldwell wants to meet about governance that doesn't rely on personality cults. She smirked. Imagine that. I can, I said. I just won't chair it. Good, she replied. You don't need a throne to keep a promise. On Magnolia Street, the white looked less persuasive in afternoon light. I let myself in one last time, not to audit, but to close a drawer. The mantel held only the polished sculpture now. I had taken my square of cloth the night before and folded it into a size that fit a pocket, but not forgetting. I set the key Richard had pressed into my hand 40 years earlier on the stone brass against bright metal and laid the navy ribbon across it, a soft slash of color that refused to consult the catalog. I wrote a note on the back of an old place card I found in a drawer. Names are promises. Keep only the ones you can carry. I did not sign it. The handwriting was enough. I left by the garden path. The flagstones Richard had laid were still uneven in the same places. I did not correct them. Some imbalances should remain as warnings. Back at Sable Sound, the cottage greeted me with the smell of tea leaves and a window that knew how to hold sky. Jonas was on the porch with his impossible square handwriting on a brown bag, bread. Also weather. The weather in question kept its distance, more rumor than storm. He poured us coffee like a man who had learned that caffeine is not a solution so much as a companion for decisions already made. What now, he asked. Now I keep nothing I didn't choose, I said. He nodded at the scrap of cloth on the table, keeping that. Yes, I said. It's not evidence, it's a map. We ate our bread and named the boats by their stubbornness. Jonas told a story about a summer squall that had taught him which ropes to trust. You don't tie to what looks strongest, he said. You tie to what's sunk deepest. People confuse surface with structure, I said. Buildings do too, he replied, eyes on a skyline we didn't need. In the days that followed, notices moved through the mail with the efficiency of things too dull to photograph reinstatements, corrections, receipts. The scholarship office posted a quiet update. Funds reopened criteria, restored the application line, blinking back to life like a town that remembered its own lights. Caldwell sent me a packet inviting comment on governance reforms. I wrote on the margins with a pencil, no proxies in crisis, no diagnostics without counter-signature. Publish minutes. I added lightly as one adds a note to a recipe. Tell the truth in plain language. It travels fastest and arrives intact. I did not return to a podium. I wrote 2 letters, one to a young woman whose application essay I remembered even when my name did not, and one to Bellamy thanking him not for the vote, but for the sentence he'd placed on the record, taking the draft back. He replied on heavy paper with a line that sounded like our kitchen years ago. We do the simplest difficult things and call it honor. On a wet Tuesday, a package appeared without a return address. Inside was a photo of a community center ribbon, cutting the kind where everyone wears more hope than fabric. I recognized Adrian only by the tilt of his head. He stood off to the side, no scissors, no headline handing brochures to people who did not know his last name. A sticky note on the back, restored. I put the photo in a drawer with the recipes my mother had written in a hand that taught me what proportion feels like. Nora visited on a Sunday with fresh strawberries in a folder she didn't bother to open. The story is over, she said, meaning the case. The rest is life. Which is longer, I said. Which is better, she countered. We walked the Strand. She asked about chairs and curtains and whether I'd paint. I told her I had bought a cheap set of inks and a stack of heavy paper. The lines keep finding their way back to the sea, I said. Let them, she replied. It's a good editor. In the evening, when the sound had the color of pewter and applause, I sat at the table and wrote 3 words with a brush that didn't require flourish. I am here. Not a manifesto, not a brand, just a fact. I taped the paper to the inside of the cupboard where I keep the mugs, a place I would see when I reached for warmth. The phone rang less. When it rang, it was often for things that belonged to now. Jonas wondering if I wanted clams, the library reminding me my card still worked, a woman from the scholarship office asking whether Marlowe should remain on the program or be replaced with something that felt more like air. "Leave the name," I said. "But take me off the podium. Will you speak at this next ceremony?" she asked, hopeful. "I'll sit in the back," I said. Clapping is a language I still speak. On a bright morning that arrived like an apology, a child's drawing slid under my door. Crayon serious lines, the ocean rendered as a blue that refused to stay inside itself. A woman on a porch with hair like weather and a mug the size of certainty. At the bottom, uncertain spelling in bold letters. "The quiet lady by the water." No signature. I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, then laughed at my own sentimentality and left it there anyway. I brewed tea. Earl Grey, a little honey. Outside, the tide put its hand on the rocks and took it back again, practicing patience. I thought of Richard's letter, of Nora's pencil marks, of Jonas's square handwriting, of Bellamy's sentence, of Adrian handing brochures with his head lowered to the work. People will ask, if they ask at all, whether I forgave him. Forgiveness is a room with too many chairs. I keep a smaller room now, accountability, repair boundary. Grace 4 chairs, no spectators. Some days he sits in the doorway and listens. Some days the door is shut. The house stands anyway. I did not burn anything down. I walked out with my name unscorched and shut a door that had mistaken itself for a throne. Revenge is loud. Reclamation can be mistaken for silence until you see what it rebuilds. In the honest math of the sea waves, don't punish cliffs. They redraw them until the line makes sense. Dusk returned with its faithful editing. I carried my mug to the porch and let the air do what it does best. Remind every living thing that it belongs to itself first. Somewhere in a room with better carpet than wisdom, people drafted a new charter. Somewhere else, a young applicant pressed submit and believed the word meant what it said again. I am not a saint, and I am not a ghost. I am a woman who kept accounts and learned finally which ones were worth balancing. When I lock my door at night, it is not against the past, but in favor of sleep. The sound breathed, the kettle clicked. The house did not ask anything of me but presence. That, at last, was everything. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.